A quiet marine biology teacher from Anaheim once drew a small comic book about tide pools to teach kids about the ocean. That little comic book grew into one of the most successful cartoons in television history. SpongeBob SquarePants has been on the air for over 25 years, has aired more than 300 episodes, has produced 4 movies, a Broadway musical, and a brand worth billions. The world inside the show is built with more care than almost any other kids' cartoon ever made. A pineapple house, a stone head next door, a flat rock on the other side of the street, a restaurant shaped like a fishing trap, a failed restaurant shaped like a metal bucket, a torn recipe, a war veteran with a daughter who is a whale, a tiny green copepod with a wife built out of an old calculator. Tonight, we walk slowly through the entire lore of Bikini Bottom and the strange theories the fanbase has been quietly building underneath it for over 25 years. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let's get started. The marine biologist who built the city beneath the atoll. To understand Bikini Bottom, you have to start with the man who drew it, and the man who drew it almost did not become an animator at all. His name was Stephen McDaniel Hillenburg, and for most of his early adult life, the city of Bikini Bottom did not exist anywhere except in a small comic book about tide pools that no publisher ever wanted to print. Stephen was born on August 21st, 1961, on a United States Army base in Lawton, Oklahoma. His father was working for the military at the time. The family did not stay there long. By the time Stephen was about a year old, they had moved to Anaheim, California, where his father started a new career as a draftsman in the aerospace industry, and his mother taught visually impaired students. The desert and the army base disappeared from his memory almost as soon as they had appeared in it. Southern California, with its long coastline and its endless beaches, became the only home he ever really knew. He was a quiet child. By his own description in later interviews, he was probably well-meaning and a little naive, like a lot of kids tend to be. He liked drawing, he liked the ocean. He liked watching the slow underwater documentaries of the French oceanographer Jacques Cousteau on television, listening to the deep, unhurried voice describe the strange creatures that lived at the bottom of the sea. Years later, when SpongeBob SquarePants needed a narrator to introduce every episode, Hillenburg would parody Cousteau directly. The voice that says, "We are now in Bikini Bottom," is, in many ways, the voice of the older man tucked permanently into the show. The accent, the slow cadence, the gentle pretending that the audience has just dropped into an episode of a real ocean documentary. It is all there because Hillenburg, as a child, had spent so many afternoons sitting in front of a television set listening to a man describe the sea. When Stephen was 15, he went snorkeling for the first time on a school dive program at Woods Cove in Laguna Beach. Something in him locked into place that day. He would later describe it as a switch clicking inside his head. He decided, more or less in that moment, that he wanted to be a marine biologist. But he also wanted to be an artist. He was not yet sure he had to pick one path or the other. He kept drawing strange little paintings on the side. He kept reading about ocean creatures during the day. Some of his high school teachers, knowing about both interests, told him he should just draw fish for a living. Stephen found that advice unsatisfying. Drawing fish for a living sounded boring to him. He kept the science track and the art track running side by side, even when nobody could see how the two were ever going to meet. In the summers of his late teen years, before college, he took a job that would sit in his memory for the rest of his life. He worked as a fry cook and a lobster boiler at a fast food seafood restaurant in Maine. The job was greasy and hot and not glamorous in any way. The staff at the restaurant would dress up as pirates and sing songs to entertain the young customers. One of those songs included the first 2 lines of what would, decades later, become the theme song of SpongeBob SquarePants. The Krusty Krab, in its earliest cellular form, was already alive in Stephen's real life, years before it was ever a cartoon. The character of SpongeBob, a fry cook in a stained apron behind a grill, was being seeded inside his memory long before he ever picked up a pen to draw it. He chose the science path first. He went to Humboldt State University in Arcata, California, and graduated in 1984 with a degree in natural resource planning and interpretation, with an emphasis on marine resources. After graduation, he took a job at the Orange County Marine Institute in Dana Point, which is now known as the Ocean Institute. His job there was to teach marine biology to children. He led tide pool walks. He talked to small groups of school-aged kids about diversity, adaptation, and the strange variety of life that lived in the rocky crevices along the California coast. He worked staff art on the side, drawing illustrations for institute materials. He watched, every single day, say how absolutely fascinated children were with the small, strange creatures that lived in the tide pools. He stayed at the institute for 3 years. During that time, an educational director asked him if he would be willing to write a comic book for the children who came through the institute, something that could teach them about tide pool ecology in a more accessible way. Stephen said yes. He went home and made a comic book called The Intertidal Zone. It featured anthropomorphic sea creatures, walking and talking, hosted by a character named Bob the Sponge. Bob the Sponge looked like an actual sea sponge, soft and round and a little weird, not at all like the kitchen sponge that would come later. The comic was strange and funny, and clearly the work of someone who loved his subject too much to be bored by it. Children loved it. Stephen tried to find a publisher who would print it as a real comic book. No publisher said yes. The comic stayed inside the institute, used as a teaching tool for years, while Stephen kept teaching, and slowly, somewhere inside him, a quiet shift began. He liked teaching, he loved the ocean, but what he was actually best at, what kept him up at night in a way that nothing else did, was the drawing. In 1987, he made a decision that to many people in his life seemed a little reckless. He left the institute. He went back to school. He enrolled at the California Institute of the Arts in Valencia in their experimental animation program, on the strength of the Intertidal Zone, which his teacher Jules Engel had seen and liked. He earned his Master of Fine Arts in 1992. While he was at Cal Arts, he made 2 short animated films. The first was called The Green Beret, a strange cartoon about a Girl Scout with enormous fists trying to sell cookies. The second was Wormholes, a more philosophical short based on the theory of relativity, which won an award for Best Concept at the Ottawa International Animation Festival. At that festival, Stephen met an animator named Joe Murray, who had just been hired by Nickelodeon to make a series called Rocko's Modern Life. Joe Murray offered Stephen a job. From 1993 to 1996, Stephen worked on Rocko's Modern Life, eventually becoming a creative director on the series. While he was there, he kept thinking about the Intertidal Zone, the comic he had made years earlier in Dana Point. One of the writers on Rocko's Modern Life, a man named Martin Olson, read the comic and told Stephen something that would change the trajectory of his entire life. Olson told him he should make it into a TV show. Stephen, having watched Joe Murray pull his hair out trying to keep Rocko's Modern Life on the air, had previously sworn he would never run his own show. But Olson kept pushing the idea. Slowly, over the course of months, Stephen started to listen. He went home and he opened a notebook, and he started to redesign Bob the Sponge. The first thing he changed was the shape. The natural sea sponge was too soft, too organic, too easy to overlook on a screen. He sketched a kitchen sponge instead, square and rigid and cheerful, and the moment he drew it, he later said, it just looked funny. The square shape made the character. He added gapped front teeth, modeled on his own childhood photos, where his teeth had a similar gap. He added a white shirt, a red tie, and brown square pants. He named the character Sponge Boy. The original pitch was for a series called Sponge Boy Ahoy. He recorded a 7-minute pilot with that name. Then, late in the process, the legal team discovered that Sponge Boy was already trademarked by a mop company. Stephen had to change the name. He kept the word sponge because he was afraid that without it, children would mistake the character for a piece of cheese. He swapped the second part for Bob, with SquarePants as a kind of family name. The series became SpongeBob SquarePants. He pitched the idea to Nickelodeon executives in 1997. He famously brought a fish tank to the meeting, set it on a table, and let the executives meet the characters as he moved figurines around inside it. The executives wanted some changes. They wanted SpongeBob to be a child who went to school. Stephen wanted SpongeBob to be an adult. The compromise they reached was Mrs. Puff and her boating school, where SpongeBob, as a working adult, attends a kind of permanent driver's education class he can never quite pass. The pilot for SpongeBob SquarePants aired on May 1st, 1999, as a sneak peek after the Kids' Choice Awards. From that night forward, Stephen Hillenburg's life was no longer his own. He ran the show through 3 seasons. In 2002, he stepped back as showrunner to focus on the first feature film, which he intended to be the proper ending of the series. Nickelodeon had other plans. The show kept going. Hillenburg returned later in life, working on the second movie and contributing to many of the episodes that would air after his death. In 2017, he announced that he had been diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a degenerative motor neuron disease. He kept working on the show as long as he was physically able. He died on November 26, 2018, at the age of 57, at his home in San Marino, California. California. His ashes were sprinkled off the coast of Los Angeles County, returned to the ocean he had spent his whole life loving. The city he left behind, the place called Bikini Bottom, was always rooted in something Hillenburg knew from his marine biology days. He had picked the name on purpose. He could have invented an underwater geography of his own. He had chosen a real one, a famous one, and one with a very specific dark history that he, as someone who had studied the sea for years, would have known about in detail. We will return to that history in the second half of this video. For now, what matters is that the man who drew the city was, underneath everything, the soul of a marine biologist who simply wanted children to look more closely at tide pools. The cheerful sponge in the cheerful underwater town was the disguise. The science was the heart. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The man who drew the city was strange. The city he built was stranger. In the next section, we walk through Bikini Bottom itself, the muffler houses, and the quiet logic that holds the whole place together. Section 2, the geography of Bikini Bottom and the city Hillenburg built on top of it. Bikini Bottom, the underwater city where SpongeBob lives, is the most carefully built throwaway joke in the history of animation. The city has rules. It has a coastline. It has a downtown. It has neighborhoods. It has a public transportation system, a school system, a justice system, a sports league, a music scene, a food culture, a tourism industry, and a long, slow descent into a place called Rock Bottom that is treated as a separate city entirely. None of this had to be there. The show could have been 3 or 4 houses and a restaurant, and it would still have been funny. But Steven Hillenburg was a marine biologist, and marine biologists do not build half-worlds. Once he started building this one, he could not stop. The result is one of the most fully realized fictional places ever produced for a children's program. The city sits, by intention, in a specific place on the real map of the world. The opening of every episode begins with the French narrator saying that we are in Bikini Bottom, and the location is not a coincidence. According to Nickelodeon's own program summary, Bikini Bottom is located in the Pacific Ocean beneath Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The atoll is a real coral reef in the Central Pacific made up of 23 small islands arranged in a rough oval shape. The name is a quiet pun. The atoll above is called Bikini. The underwater city below is at the bottom of the sea, so it is Bikini Bottom. The pun also carries a much heavier real-world history that Hillenburg knew about in detail, and we will come back to that history in the dark second half of this video. For now, what matters is that he picked a real place on purpose, and the real place gave the city a permanent location on the world map. The geography of the city, once you start mapping it, is layered. The address of SpongeBob's house is 124 Conch Street. It is a pineapple-shaped home that sits between 2 of the most recognizable houses in animation. To one side is Squidward's house at 122 Conch Street, a tall blue moai statue based on the famous stone heads of Easter Island. To the other side is Patrick's house, which is not really a house at all, but a flat gray rock with a small dirt floor underneath it, and, in many episodes, a television set mounted in the dirt. The 3 houses are arranged in a line along Conch Street, with the smallest, weirdest one in the middle. The visual joke is permanent. SpongeBob is the cheerful absurdity that lives between the moai head and the rock. The 3 houses are also a very deliberate piece of writing about the 3 personalities. Sincere joy in the middle, dry artistic frustration on one side, and oblivious contentment on the other. The pineapple was Hillenburg's idea, and it was driven by a marine biology principle. He wanted SpongeBob to live in something that did not look like a normal house, because real sea sponges live attached to coral and other surfaces in tide pools and reefs, and an upside-down pineapple, with its strange hollow inside and its bright color, gave the character a home that would never be mistaken for a human dwelling. The pineapple has multiple levels inside, including a kitchen, a living room, a bedroom upstairs, and a bathroom. Gary the snail lives there too, and there is a long tradition in the show of treating Gary as a cat, even though Gary is a sea snail with the meow of a domestic shorthair. The pet relationship, the snail as cat, is one of the cleanest examples of how Hillenburg built the show. He took a real ocean creature, applied a slightly absurd human framework to it, and then played the result completely straight. Squidward's moai head, the tall stone face that sits next door, is a direct reference to the famous statues on Easter Island in the Pacific. According to the 2004 book SpongeBob Exposed, the house was built out of volcanic rock. The choice This fits Squidward's character. He is a self-important would-be artist, and a stone head with a permanently disappointed expression is exactly the kind of dwelling a Squidward would choose. The interior of his house is full of self-portraits, paintings of his own face, sculptures of his own face, busts of his own face. The visual gag is layered. Squidward lives inside a stone face, and the inside of the stone face is filled with more faces of the same person. Patrick's rock is the simplest of the three. It is the kind of joke an 8-year-old would invent. Patrick is a starfish. Real starfish live under rocks in real tide pools, and Patrick lives under a rock in Bikini Bottom. The rock has a flat top, a flat bottom, and a small crawl space underneath, where Patrick sleeps and watches television. Hillenburg's marine biology background is sitting right there on the screen. Beyond the three houses, the city expands outward in every direction. The Krusty Krab restaurant, where SpongeBob works as a fry cook, is built inside the body of an old fishing trap. Across the street is the Chum Bucket, the failed restaurant owned by Plankton and Karen, built inside the body of an actual metal bucket with a giant arm on the roof. The two restaurants face each other directly, which is part of the running joke. The most successful restaurant in town and the worst restaurant in town are neighbors, and they have been at war for decades. There is also the Bikini Bottom Mall, where Pearl works at a clothing store. There is the Goofy Goober ice cream parlor. There is Mrs. Puff's boating school, attached to a submerged lighthouse, where SpongeBob takes his driving lessons and crashes his boatmobile every single time. There is a hospital, a police station, a jail, a courthouse, an art museum, a bowling alley, a movie theater, a sports stadium, and a public park. The transportation system in Bikini Bottom is one of the most quietly clever pieces of world building in the show. The residents of the city drive boatmobiles, which are exactly what the name suggests. They are small motorboats that drive on the underwater ground like cars. The roads are roads. The traffic lights work. There are stop signs and crosswalks and parking lots, and the boatmobiles are treated like cars in every way that matters. The show never explains how a boat is supposed to drive on the bottom of the ocean. It just commits to the joke completely, and after a few episodes, the audience accepts that this is simply how Bikini Bottom works. The city is divided into districts. The main road, Conch Street, runs from downtown all the way out to the suburbs, past the homes of SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick, through the Krusty Krab, the Chum Bucket, and the Reef Theater Cinema. The road intersects with Barnacle Road and Coral Avenue. Anchor Way is not far off from Conch Street. The downtown district holds most of the gray cylindrical buildings made of metal that fill the city skyline. The Sea Needle, which is the tallest point in Bikini Bottom, appears in the episode Pre-Hibernation Week and in the video game Battle for Bikini Bottom. The county line is the boundary of the city. Anything beyond the county line is treated, in the show, as another world entirely. Outside the main city, the geography keeps expanding. There is Goo Lagoon, the local beach, where the residents go to sunbathe even though they are already underwater. The beach has a real lifeguard tower, real sand, real volleyball games, and bubbly water that the show treats as a separate kind of liquid that you cannot breathe, even though everyone in the city is already breathing water. There is Jellyfish Fields, a hilly grassland area where giant jellyfish float around, producing a substance called jelly that SpongeBob treats as a kind of underwater honey. He hunts them with a net and a jar, in a direct parody of butterfly hunters in old cartoons. There is Sandy Cheeks' Tree Dome, a glass dome filled with air and a real tree, where Sandy lives because she is a squirrel from Texas and cannot breathe underwater without a suit. Beyond the county line, the show keeps going. There is Rock Bottom, a separate city located in a deep underwater trench, which we will return to later. There is Bass Vegas, the local equivalent of Las Vegas. There is New Kelp City, a parody of New York City, terrorized by a gang called the Bubble Poppin' Boys. There is Tentacle Acres, also called Squidville, a gated community where every house is a moai statue and only octopuses are allowed to live. There is Dullsville, a small shopping town 50 miles from Bikini Bottom. There is Atlantis, the lost city, ruled either by King Neptune or by Lord Royal Highness, depending on which episode you are watching. There is Shell City, on the surface, 6 days away through a long and dangerous route. There is Bottoms Up, a fancy sister city. There is Leisure Village, Ukulele Bottom, Palm Bay, and the wealthy cliff district called Waverly Hills. The show treats all of these places as real and reachable. The geography keeps unfolding outward as the seasons go on, until Bikini Bottom is no longer a single city, but the center of an entire underwater region with its own politics, its own celebrity culture, and its own news network. The architecture of the residential neighborhood neighborhoods is dominated by mufflers. Most of the houses in Bikini Bottom are shaped like car mufflers, with a long cylindrical body and round openings. This is one of those details that is easy to miss the first time you watch the show, but once you see it, you cannot stop seeing it. The houses are mufflers, the lampposts are anchors, the fire hydrants are oxygen tanks, the mailboxes are old diving helmets. The entire city, when you look closely, is built out of the kind of debris that would settle on the ocean floor if a coastal community above the surface were to be wiped out. Hillenburg never explained this directly in any single interview, but the design is so consistent that it cannot be accidental. The city of Bikini Bottom is built out of the bones of a human world, and the residents have made homes inside the wreckage. The longtime writer Mr. Lawrence eventually confirmed in 2024 that this was, in fact, the original concept of the show. We will get to that confirmation in section 6. Above the city, the surface exists, and the show is inconsistent about how to treat it. In some episodes, the residents go to the surface and meet humans, like David Hasselhoff, who carries SpongeBob and Patrick across the ocean in the first feature film. In other episodes, the surface is treated as a kind of mythological place where dangerous things live, and being pulled up by a fishing hook is a horror story that fish parents tell their children. The show never resolves this contradiction. It simply lets both versions exist at the same time, and the audience accepts it because the audience accepts everything in Bikini Bottom. What makes the city work, in the end, is that it feels lived in. Hillenburg did not just build a setting, he built a community. The residents have jobs, families, hobbies, and grudges that last across episodes. Old Man Jenkins shows up in dozens of episodes as the cranky elderly local. The tattletale strangler stalks SpongeBob across an entire half hour. The Bikini Bottom news anchor, Perch Perkins, appears in dozens of episodes covering the latest crisis. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy live at Shady Shoals Rest Home. Larry the Lobster lifeguards at Goo Lagoon. The city has a population that has names, faces, and recurring storylines. And the longer you watch, the more you start to recognize the same fish in the background of unrelated scenes. Hillenburg built a world, and then trusted the world to do the heavy lifting for him. And after 25 years, the world is still doing it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The city sits on top of 3 central locations, and one of them carries more weight than all the others combined. In the next section, we walk through the Krusty Krab, the secret formula, and the day Plankton and Mr. Krabs tore a recipe in half. Section 3, the Krusty Krab, the Krabby Patty, and the day the recipe was torn in half. The Krusty Krab is the most important building in Bikini Bottom. It is where SpongeBob works. It is where the city's central economic engine sits. It is where Squidward suffers. It is where Mr. Krabs counts his money. It is the place that the residents of Bikini Bottom orbit around, as if it were the spiritual center of their entire underwater world. In the second feature film, when Plankton finally steals the secret formula and the patties stop being made, Mr. Krabs delivers a line that the show treats with full seriousness. He says that the Krabby Patty is what ties the city together, and that without it, there will be a complete breakdown of social order. The line is played for comedy on the surface, but the writers were not entirely joking when they wrote it. The Krusty Krab really is the heart of the city, and its origin story is more layered than almost any other piece of canon in the entire show. To understand the Krusty Krab, you have to understand that the building itself was not built to be a restaurant. According to the Krusty Krab training video, an episode that aired in May 2002, the structure was originally a retirement home that had gone bankrupt long before Mr. Krabs ever bought it. The narrator of the training video walks viewers through the history with the calm tone of an industrial corporate orientation tape. The retirement home went out of business. Mr. Krabs, who had recently come back from war and had spent a long stretch of time in what the narrator describes as a deep depression that seemed endless, eventually decided to buy the abandoned building and turn it into a restaurant. The episode shows him alone in a darkened room looking exhausted, and then it shows him slowly rebuilding, painting the sign, hanging the menu, and opening the doors. The shape of the building itself is not a coincidence. The Krusty Krab is built to look like a wooden lobster trap. It has wooden slats, a curved roof, a chimney, and a door shaped like an opening in the trap. The choice is layered. Mr. Krabs is a crab. The food sold inside is named after him. The building is a trap. The residents of Bikini Bottom walk willingly into a place named after the predator who runs it, where a food named after that same predator is sold, and they line up around the block to do it. Real lobster traps are wooden cages with one-way openings designed to lure a creature inside and prevent it from escaping. The Krusty Krab, as a building, is the same shape, with the same one-way pull. The food that built the restaurant is the Krabby Patty, and the secret formula behind it is the longest-running mystery in the show. According to SpongeBob's recipe card in the Season 1 episode Pickles, the visible ingredients of a Krabby Patty include a top bun, a bottom bun, a patty, lettuce, cheese, onions, tomatoes, ketchup, mustard, and pickles. None of those are secret. What is secret is what is inside the patty itself, and what is in the small glass bottle that Mr. Krabs keeps locked in a safe inside the restaurant. The bottle is sealed with a cork. The recipe is written on a piece of paper rolled up inside it. In the episode Friendiversary, the show reveals that SpongeBob is actually the only one who knows the combination to the safe, and he keeps the combination tied to a memory of one of his earliest experiences with Squidward. When that memory is erased, the formula is briefly inaccessible even to the people who own it. Steven Hillenburg made one specific decision about the formula that has shaped how every writer has handled it for over 25 years. He decided, very early on, that the patty would contain no meat at all. According to longtime animator and producer Vincent Waller, Hillenburg let it slip in conversation that there is absolutely no meat in the Krabby Patty, and no animal product of any kind. Mr. Lawrence, the writer and the voice of Plankton, has confirmed the same thing in interviews. The writers of the show are not even allowed to depict fish being eaten as food in most contexts. Hillenburg conceived of the Krabby Patty as a vegetable-based burger, which is part of why fans got so frustrated in 2024 when Wendy's announced a Krabby Patty collab promotion that used the chain's signature beef burger, in direct contradiction to the canon Hillenburg had spent decades building. The actual ingredients that have been confirmed in the show are vague on purpose. In the episode The Great Patty Caper, 3 ingredients are confirmed. The patty contains flour, barnacle shavings, and turmeric. In the episode SpongeBob on Parade, salt is named as one of the ingredients. In the episode Krabby Road, the formula is briefly visible on screen, but the ingredients listed there are written in deliberate gibberish. Vincent Waller confirmed in a Twitter reply that the gibberish was intentional, written specifically so that no audience member could ever decode the recipe. SpongeBob himself, in the episode Plankton's Army, whispers to Plankton that the true secret ingredient is love, which is the only direct on-screen answer the show has ever given. Beyond the recipe, the Krusty Krab has its own internal mythology. There is a patty vault inside the restaurant, revealed in the Season 3 episode Just One Bite, which contains a massive stockpile of Krabby Patties stacked from floor to ceiling. The same episode also reveals that Krabby Patties are addictive. Squidward, who has spent years insisting he hates the patties, eats just one and falls into a kind of obsessive frenzy, stealing dozens of them in the middle of the night and being caught by a hidden security system. The implication is that there is something inside the patty that is genuinely chemically compelling. The first feature film treats the patties as so essential that, when the recipe is stolen, the city falls into open dystopia within days. How the recipe came into being is the deepest piece of canon the show has ever produced, and it was revealed in the Season 5 premiere, Friend or Foe, which aired on April 13th, 2007. After yet another failed attempt by Plankton to steal the secret formula, SpongeBob asks Mr. Krabs why the two of them hate each other so much. Mr. Krabs sits down with a heavy expression on his face and, for the first time in the show's history, tells the truth. Mr. Krabs and Plankton, according to Friend or Foe, were born on the same day, in the same hospital. They grew up together. They were inseparable as children. Both of them were outcasts. Plankton was bullied for being a nerd because he was already showing signs of being scientifically gifted at a young age. Mr. Krabs was bullied for being extremely poor. Mr. Krabs lived in such poverty that, in one early flashback, he is shown wearing a cardboard box because his actual clothes were stolen by a neighbor who was using them to clean his car. The two boys went to a local hangout called Stinky Burgers, a fast food joint located on top of a literal landfill. The owner, Stinky, refused to serve them. He told them that freaks like them were bad for business. That moment is the original wound. Plankton and Mr. Krabs decided that day to build their own burger restaurant. The local health department eventually closed Stinky's down for health violations, and Plankton and Mr. Krabs opened a place called Plab's Burgers in the same dump. They made their first patty together, and they served it to Old Man Jenkins as their first customer. Jenkins took one bite and collapsed. The patty was poisonous. The implication is that he genuinely died from the experience, though Jenkins shows up alive in later episodes anyway. The collapse of Old Man Jenkins triggered the moment that ended the friendship. Plankton accused Mr. Krabs of tainting the patty. Mr. Krabs accused Plankton of tainting the patty. They began to fight. They grabbed the recipe, the original handwritten formula, and they each pulled at one end of the paper. The recipe ripped in half. Plankton ended up with the smaller half, which read only the words and a pinch of chum. Mr. Krabs ended up with the larger half. As they continued to fight, a shelf in the kitchen was knocked over. A pile of unrelated ingredients fell into the patty batter. The combination of those ingredients, by complete accident, created the actual Krabby Patty as it exists today. The recipe was not engineered. It was the result of an argument between two best friends who were tearing each other apart in a dump and a falling shelf that nobody planned for. Mr. Krabs took his half of the recipe and built the Krusty Krab. The bankrupt retirement home was waiting for him. He had the cooking skills from his Navy years and his pirate years. He had the trauma from the war. He had a small fortune from selling his old ship. He had the half of the recipe that contained the actual secret. He bought the building, painted the sign, hung the menu, and opened the doors. Plankton, with his half of the recipe that read only "and a pinch of chum," opened the chum bucket directly across the street and tried to make the patty work without the missing ingredients. The chum bucket has never had more than a handful of customers in the entire run of the series. Plankton has spent the rest of his life trying to steal back the half of the paper he lost in that childhood fight, and Mr. Krabs has spent the rest of his life keeping it locked in a glass bottle behind a safe. The Krusty Krab, when you look at it that way, is not really a restaurant. It is a monument to a broken friendship built inside the body of a fishing trap on top of the bones of an abandoned retirement home in a city that sits beneath a real-world nuclear test site. Every Krabby Patty served inside it is a piece of that history. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The story of the Krusty Krab is also the story of the man who runs it, but Mr. Krabs' history goes much deeper than a torn recipe. In the next section, we walk through Eugene H. Krabs, the war he came back from, and the unanswered question at the center of his family. Section 4, Eugene H. Krabs and the family the show refused to draw. Eugene Harold Krabs is one of the strangest main characters in any long-running children's animated show, and the strangeness is built into his canon in layers. He is a crab. He runs a restaurant. He has a teenage daughter who is a whale. He served in a military conflict that the show has never named. He suffered through what the show treats with unusual seriousness as a long, deep depression. He once lived in such extreme poverty that he had to wear a cardboard box for clothing. He is the friend who turned into the enemy of Plankton over a torn recipe. He is the man who took in Pearl when her mother disappeared, and the man Stephen Hillenburg refused until the day he died to allow the writers to ever fully explain. His full name is Eugene H. Krabs, and the H stands for Harold, according to the SpongeBob SquarePants Trading Cards Premiere Edition. His birthday is November 30th, 1942, the same day as Plankton's, and the two of them were born in the same hospital. The 1942 birth date matters because it places Mr. Krabs' young adulthood directly inside the era of the Vietnam War, which ran from 1955 to 1975, and that timing has fueled one of the most enduring fan readings of his character. The show has been very careful to never name the specific war that Mr. Krabs fought in. The Krusty Krab training video uses only the phrase "the war" with no further detail, but the way the episode treats his return, with the line about a deep depression that seemed endless, and the visual of him alone in a darkened room with what appears to be a bottle next to him, is a direct echo of how American culture has portrayed Vietnam veterans returning home with post-traumatic stress disorder. The Navy past is canon. It is referenced in multiple episodes. In Shell of a Man, his old Navy buddies come to visit him, and the show takes a slightly darker tone than usual. One of his Navy friends has a torpedo permanently lodged in his torso. Another has an iron eye, suggesting that his real eye was lost in combat. Another walks with a permanent limp. They are all cheerful about it, in the way that real veterans sometimes are when they reunite, but the implications are heavy. These are men who saw something. The episode treats Mr. Krabs as the host, and his shame about the loss of his physical shell, which is what the episode is actually about, is layered with a quieter shame about what he and his friends went through together in their younger years. In The Krusty Sponge, Mr. Mr. Krabs talks about having had the 1,000-yard stare during his service days. The phrase is a real military term for the unfocused, distant gaze that traumatized soldiers develop after extended combat. The show uses the phrase as a one-line joke. Anyone who knows what it actually refers to knows that the joke is not really a joke at all. Before the Navy, according to canon revealed in episodes like Pull Up a Barrel and Grandpappy the Pirate, Mr. Krabs had a career as a pirate, or at least as someone who tried to live a pirate's life on a ship that he eventually had to sell. The pirate background is part of why his accent is what it is. His voice actor, Clancy Brown, modeled the voice on a slight Scottish lilt layered on top of the original direction Hillenburg gave him, which was to play the character as a former manager Hillenburg had worked under at a seafood restaurant in his earlier life. That manager, according to Hillenburg, was red-headed, muscular, and a former army cook, and his strong Maine accent had reminded Hillenburg of an old pirate. The character of Mr. Krabs is, in many ways, a fictionalized portrait of that manager, combined with every greedy boss Hillenburg had ever had. The greed is exaggerated to the point of cartoon insanity, but it sits on top of a real person, which is why it never quite reads as completely artificial. The childhood of Mr. Krabs, as established in Friend or Foe, and reinforced across many other flashback episodes, was defined by extreme poverty. He grew up with a single mother, named Betsy in the canonical reveal during Friend or Foe. His father is rarely mentioned. The lack of a father is one of the quiet aches in his backstory that the show occasionally returns to. The poverty was severe enough that, in flashbacks, he is shown in clothes made from rags, or, in one infamous moment, naked except for a cardboard box, because his actual clothing had been taken by a neighbor for use as cleaning rags. That moment, played as a comedic flashback, also functions as a quiet explanation for everything the audience knows about Mr. Krabs as an adult: his obsession with money, his refusal to spend even a single penny when he can avoid it, his willingness to do almost anything for profit. All of it traces back to a childhood where money was simply not available, and where the absence of it determined how his neighbors treated him every single day. The first dollar he ever earned is a recurring artifact in the show. It hangs in a frame on the wall in his house. In the episode Wet Painters, the entire plot is driven by SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally putting a paint stain on that dollar, and Mr. Krabs' reaction is genuine horror. He treats the loss of that dollar as if it were the loss of a family member. The first dollar is, in his internal world, a kind of relic. It is the moment when his life as a poor, bullied child began to change, and it is the foundation on which the entire Krusty Krab eventually got built. The marriage of Mr. Krabs is the canonical mystery that Stephen Hillenburg refused to solve. According to the SpongeBob SquarePants trivia book, written in 2000 by former episode writer David Fain, Pearl is biologically Mr. Krabs' daughter, and the line in the trivia book has Mr. Krabs say that Pearl is a whale because she takes after her mother. The implication of that line is that there was, at some point, a Mrs. Krabs, and that Mrs. Krabs was a whale. She has never been seen on screen. She has never been named directly in any episode. She has never been confirmed as living, dead, or simply absent. According to current showrunner Vincent Waller, Hillenburg received many letters over the years from fans asking for an episode that would explain Pearl's origin. A plot outline for that episode was actually written and entered early development during season 5. Hillenburg shut it down. He told the writers that Pearl's origin was not something the show should ever explain, and the episode was shelved indefinitely. The decision was permanent. Hillenburg never changed his mind, and after his death, the writers have continued to honor his refusal. In the episode Married to Money, Mr. Krabs tells Pearl that he may have found her a new mom, which is the closest the show has ever come to directly acknowledging that there was an old one. The naming of Pearl is, in itself, a piece of indirect canon. Mr. Krabs uses the phrase "mother of pearl" as a recurring exclamation throughout the series. He says it whenever he is shocked. The phrase is a real expression in English, referring to the iridescent inner shell of certain mollusks. But inside the show, it carries a second meaning. Pearl is named for a mother that no one ever sees, and every time Mr. Krabs says the words "mother of pearl," he is, in a quiet way, invoking the mother of his own daughter. Hillenburg confirmed that the homage was intentional. The decision to portray Pearl as motherless was not a continuity error. It was a structural choice baked into her name from the very beginning of the series, and the silence around the mother was was, by design, permanent. Pearl herself was the second main character that Hillenburg ever created for the show, according to the production materials. Her conception is rooted directly in his time at the Orange County Marine Institute. Hillenburg supervised whale watches at the institute, and a cetacean skeleton exhibit was on display there. He decided early on that he wanted a whale character in his cast, because each member of the main cast was supposed to be a different sea animal, and a whale would give him an enormous physical presence to play with for visual gags. Pearl is depicted as extraordinarily tall and heavy because she is a whale, and the other characters are small tide pool organisms. Her size gets used for visual comedy constantly. She is able to shake the entire Krusty Krab when she jumps. She can fill the entire building with tears when she cries. She is, in canon, a sperm whale, which is the largest toothed predator currently on Earth, although her favorite food is salad, and she dreams of becoming a famous movie star. The relationship between Mr. Krabs and Pearl is one of the most tender pieces of writing in the show, and one of the most quietly contradictory. Mr. Krabs is a man defined by his obsession with money, but Pearl is the one thing in his life that he consistently spends money on, even when he hates spending it. He throws her a birthday party in Whale of a Birthday, and goes to extreme lengths, eventually, to make sure it is a real one. He puts up with her constant requests for shopping money. He tolerates her noise, her tantrums, and her teenage moods. In Pearl's bedroom, she keeps photos and trophies, and the kind of clutter you would expect from any teenage girl. Mr. Krabs is shown to have loved her since infancy, which, in the canon of the show, contradicts most adoption-based fan readings. He raised her himself. The shape of Mr. Krabs as a character has evolved across the show's run, and the evolution has not always been kind. In the early seasons, he is a cheap, eccentric, slightly underhanded businessman. He cuts corners. He underpays Squidward. In the one-course meal episode, the show reveals that he pays SpongeBob in counterfeit money, known as Mr. Krabs' Wacky Bucks, which is a piece of dark humor that the writers seem to slip into a single line and then move past. In the later seasons, especially after the first feature film, his greed begins to tip into something darker. He becomes willing to risk other people's lives for money. He becomes willing to dispose of bodies. In the episode Nasty Patty, when he believes the health inspector has died, he becomes willing to torment Plankton until Plankton lays down on a road waiting for a bus to hit him in the episode One Course Meal, which we will return to later in this video. The character of Mr. Krabs has, across more than 2 decades, slowly slid from a cheerful penny pincher into something closer to a cartoon sociopath, and the show has occasionally seemed aware that the slide was happening, and occasionally seemed not to notice at all. The thing that holds him together, in canon, is Pearl. Whenever the show wants to remind the audience that Mr. Krabs is still a person rather than a monster, it puts him next to Pearl. He becomes softer around her. His greed disappears, or at least quiets down. His voice changes. He calls her his little girl, and the audience is reminded that the same crab who would underpay SpongeBob a nickel is also the father who has been standing in the doorway of a child's bedroom for years, watching to make sure she falls asleep safely. The contradiction is the character. The Mr. Krabs who runs the Krusty Krab and the Mr. Krabs who tucks Pearl in at night are, somehow, the same person. And the show has spent 25 years refusing to flatten that contradiction into something simpler. The voice actress Lori Allen, who has voiced Pearl since the very first season, has said in interviews that the topic of Pearl's mother makes her emotional. Roger Bumpus, who voices Squidward, joked at the same event that Mrs. Krabs had been taken to an oceanarium, deadpanning the words SeaWorld as a kind of grim punchline. The cast knows the question that the show will not answer. The fans know it too. The mother is in the safe. The recipe is in the safe. The story of Eugene H. Krabs is, in many ways, the story of a man who built a family out of the wreckage of a war, a broken friendship, and a marriage that the show has never been willing to draw. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The friendship Mr. Krabs broke did not end with his half of the recipe. Plankton walked out of that dump with the smaller half and a quiet rage. In the next section, we walk through the outer ring of Bikini Bottom, the squirrel in the dome, and the pufferfish whose husband became a lamp. Section 5, the outer ring of Bikini Bottom and the people who live at its edges. Sheldon J. Plankton walked out of the dump in the Friend or Foe flashback with the smaller half of the recipe in his hand and a wound that has shaped every decision he has made since. The piece of paper he ended up with read only the words and a pinch of chum, and that single phrase has has become the curse of his entire adult life. He has tried to recreate the patty with his torn fragment as a starting point, and the result has always been chum, the inedible mixture of fish parts and waste that real-world fishermen use as bait. The Chum Bucket, the failed restaurant he built directly across the street from Mr. Krabs, has been a monument to that failure for the entire run of the show. The man who runs it is one of the most quietly tragic characters in any animated series that has ever aired on a children's network. His full name is Sheldon J. Plankton, and the canon places his birth on November 30th, 1942, the same day as Mr. Krabs, in the same hospital. The two were placed in adjacent cribs as newborns, and according to the flashbacks in Friend or Foe, the friendship began the moment they were able to recognize each other's faces. They went through their entire childhood as inseparable companions, both of them outcasts, both of them bullied by the same group of children. The bullying took different forms for each of them. Mr. Krabs was bullied for his poverty. Plankton was bullied for his intelligence. He was a small, scientifically gifted child in a town where being smart and small was treated as a kind of personal failing, and the cruelty of his peers, combined with the isolation of being the only kid in school who actually understood the experiments his teachers were running, shaped him into something specific. He grew up bitter, brilliant, and lonely, and the loneliness eventually built him a wife. The story of how Karen came into existence is one of the strangest pieces of canon in any animated show. According to the episode Friend or Foe, expanded later in episodes like Goo Goo Gas and the Plankton movie that arrived on Netflix, Karen began her existence as a calculator. Plankton, as a child, having no friends after his fight with Mr. Krabs, decided to build himself a companion. He took a simple blue calculator, plugged it into a potato and a petri dish, and programmed it with the basics of an artificial intelligence. The machine he built was self-aware enough to name herself, and she chose the name Karen. For years afterward, Plankton continued upgrading her. The calculator became a more complex computer. The computer became a security system, a role she fills in some of the earlier flashback episodes. The security system became a full, waterproof supercomputer with a wall-mounted monitor in the Chum Bucket laboratory, and eventually, a mobile wheeled form that allows her to move around the restaurant. The choice to name her Karen was, in real life, a tribute. Stephen Hillenburg named the character after his own wife, Karen Hillenburg, whose maiden name was Umland. Stephen had married her in 1998, the year before SpongeBob aired. He has said in interviews that Karen Hillenburg is the funniest person he knows, and he wanted the cartoon Karen to carry some of his real wife's sense of humor. The voice of Karen was given to Jill Talley, a comedic actress who happens to be married in real life to Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob himself. The two of them have been recording together for over 25 years. According to interviews with the cast, the back and forth between Plankton and Karen, voiced by Mr. Lawrence and Jill Talley, has gradually started to overlap with their own real-life marriages, and the voice directors have, on occasion, had to ask the two of them to stop performing two voices at once during long sessions. The acronym Plankton uses for Karen, according to the show's own writing, is WIFE, which stands for Wired Integrated Female Electroencephalograph. Whether that acronym is a sweet domestic joke or a slightly disturbing piece of writing about the nature of their relationship depends on the episode and the era. Karen is the brains of the Chum Bucket. She is the one who actually invents most of the schemes Plankton uses to try to steal the Krabby Patty formula. He, in turn, has a long history of taking credit for her ideas, which has been a recurring source of tension across the seasons. In their better episodes, like Single Cell Anniversary, Plankton genuinely loves her, and she genuinely loves him. He calls her honey and sweetie. She makes a heart shape on her screen when she is happy. They celebrate their anniversary. They have ups and downs. They argue. They reconcile. The show, when it is treating them well, treats them as one of the most stable and devoted married couples in the entire cast, more functional in many ways than any of the human-fish relationships in the show. In their worse episodes, the relationship is mined for darker comedy. In the Plankton movie that arrived on Netflix in 2025, the entire plot is driven by Karen reaching a breaking point after years of being underappreciated. She removes her own empathy chip and becomes a multi-headed war machine who plans to conquer Bikini Bottom and then the world. Plankton has to team up with SpongeBob to stop her, and the resolution involves him acknowledging, for the first time in his adult life, that he has spent decades taking the woman he loves for granted. The film treats this with surprising weight. The relationship that began with a lonely child plugging a calculator into a potato has, by 2025, become a marriage of decades that has nearly ended over the question of whether whether one partner has actually been listening to the other. Outside the chum bucket, the world of Bikini Bottom keeps expanding, and one of the most important pieces of that expansion arrived in the very first episode of the show. Sandy Cheeks made her debut on May 1st, 1999, in the segment Tea at the Tree Dome, the third short of the original pilot. SpongeBob, having just been hired at the Krusty Krab in Help Wanted, encounters her wrestling a giant clam and decides to help. The clam tries to eat Sandy. Sandy fights it off. SpongeBob accidentally gets eaten in the process. Sandy rescues him, and the two of them become friends. She invites him back to her home for tea, and her home turns out to be a glass dome filled with air, with a real oak tree growing inside it, sitting at the bottom of the ocean. SpongeBob, being a sea sponge, immediately starts to dehydrate the moment he steps inside. Sandy is the only main character in the show who is not actually an ocean creature. She is a squirrel, originally from Texas, with a deep southern accent and a personality built around scientific curiosity, athletic competition, and the kind of homesick patriotism that the show has occasionally played for genuine emotion. According to Steven Hillenburg, Sandy was originally meant to come from Houston, although the show has rarely confirmed the city directly on screen. Hillenburg said in interviews that her diving suit reminded him of an astronaut, and Houston, being the home of the Johnson Space Center, felt like the right hometown for a character who arrived in Bikini Bottom dressed for what looks like a space mission. In the episode Texas, Sandy gets so homesick that SpongeBob and Patrick try to throw her a goodbye party, and the episode includes a song called I Wanna Go Home, where Sandy, briefly and without her usual bravado, becomes genuinely sad. She insists she is not crying, in true Texan fashion. She says her helmet has sprung a leak. The line is one of the most quietly tender moments in the entire run of the early seasons. The reason she came to Bikini Bottom is itself a piece of canon that was layered in over time. In her early appearances, she is described simply as a scientist studying sea creatures and their lifestyles. In the season 4 episode, Chimps Ahoy, the show reveals that her actual employers are a trio of upper-class, English-accented chimpanzees from the surface, named Dr. Marmalade, Lord Reginald, and Professor Percy. They run an organization called Tree Dome Enterprises Limited, and they pay Sandy to invent things. Her assignment, the thing she is actually being funded to produce, is groundbreaking inventions, not marine research. Marine research is what she does on the side because she enjoys it. The chimps in the episode threaten to pull her funding because she has been spending too much time hanging out with SpongeBob and Patrick instead of inventing. SpongeBob accidentally rescues her job by demonstrating, by sheer dumb luck, an invention she had built called a nutcracker that can peel a banana. The chimps are so impressed that they extend her contract for 20 more years and increase her salary. The episode is played for comedy, but it also, very quietly, locks Sandy into Bikini Bottom for the foreseeable future. Her contract has been renewed. She is staying. The Tree Dome itself is one of the most carefully designed locations in the show. It is a large polyurethane glass dome filled with air located at 126 Conch Street, 2 doors down from SpongeBob's Pineapple. Inside the dome is a real oak tree, which produces oxygen, and a small house built into the trunk. The dome includes a hamster wheel, a picnic table, a bird bath, and a bedroom where Sandy sleeps in a wooden bed made from branches of her own tree. Whenever any of her sea creature friends visit, they have to wear water helmets, which are bowls of water that fit over their heads and let them breathe normally inside her air-filled environment. The reverse rule applies when she leaves the dome. She wears a full diving suit with a glass helmet, and the air inside the helmet is what allows her to walk around the rest of the city without drowning. The visual design of her costume is, almost certainly on purpose, extremely close to the design of a real NASA spacesuit. She is a Texan, she is a squirrel, and she is dressed like a Houston astronaut, and all three of those things are doing comedic work at the same time. Mrs. Puff, the boating school instructor, is one of the strangest pieces of canon in the entire show. She is a pufferfish, voiced by Mary Jo Catlett, and her physical condition makes her inflate dramatically whenever SpongeBob crashes a boatmobile into her, which happens in nearly every episode she appears in. The choice of pufferfish as her species was deliberate. Hillenburg picked it because he wanted viewers to think of car airbags whenever she crashes and inflates. Her boating school is built around a sunken lighthouse, and the entire structure has a heavy nautical theme. She lives in a pink house and has been a permanent fixture of the city since the second episode of the series. Her backstory is darker than most viewers ever notice. According to the episode crusty love, Mrs. Puff had a husband named Mr. Puff. He was caught by humans on the surface and turned into a novelty light bulb cover for a lamp. The reveal is delivered as a quick visual gag with a brief live-action shot of a real stuffed pufferfish being switched on as a lamp by a human hand. SpongeBob explains in the same episode that Mrs. Puff does not like to talk about it. The line is small, and the show plays it for a single laugh, but the implication is heavy. Mrs. Puff is a widow. Her husband was killed by humans on the surface and turned into a piece of household decoration. The fact that she gets up every morning and teaches a teenage sponge how to drive a boat without ever bringing this up is, in its quiet way, one of the most surprising pieces of writing in the show. Her own past is implied to be murky. According to the episode No Free Rides, Mrs. Puff is not even her real name. She changed it at some point to escape a previous life, and Puff is a family name she chose for herself. Original storyboards for an episode called Lighthouse Louie include an old newspaper that captions her photo with the name Bobby Blowfish, which suggests that Mrs. Puff originally went by a different name and has been hiding from something. The show has never fully resolved this. The implication is that she has done time, that she has changed her name, and that she has built a new life teaching boating school under a new identity. She also has a cousin named Mo Blowfish, a pufferfish con man who hosts a fictional reality show. The Puff family is, by canon, full of criminals and con artists. Mrs. Puff is the one who got out. Gary the Snail, SpongeBob's pet, has his own quiet layer of canon. His full name, according to the show, is Gerald Gareth Wilson Jr. He is voiced by Tom Kenny, the same actor who voices SpongeBob himself, and the French narrator, and Patchy the Pirate, and SpongeBob's father, Harold. Gary is treated as a cat throughout the show, even though he is a sea snail, and his meowing is the underwater equivalent of a feline domestic pet. According to the episode Rule of Dumb, Gary has royal blood. The royal family tree of Bikini Bottom proves that Gary and Patrick are cousins, as their fathers were brothers. Patrick is, briefly in that episode, declared the rightful king of Bikini Bottom. The episode treats this as a joke, but the canon stands. Gary is, somewhere in his ancestry, related to royalty. His intelligence is its own quiet running gag. In most episodes, Gary acts like a regular pet, meowing and napping and refusing to take baths. But in the episode Sleepy Time, when SpongeBob accidentally enters Gary's dream, Gary speaks in a deep, wise, philosophical voice and warns SpongeBob that walking into other people's dreams is a dangerous thing to do. He owns a library inside the dream. He cites literature. He sounds like a much older man than the snail he appears to be. The episode never explains this. It simply suggests that Gary, somewhere underneath the cat-shaped exterior, is much smarter than anyone in the household has noticed. In the episode Jellyfish Hunter, it is revealed that Gary, not SpongeBob, pays the electric bill at 124 Conch Street. The implication is left to sit. The snail handles the finances. The Flying Dutchman, another recurring character, sits at the edge of Bikini Bottom canon as the city's resident ghost. He is, according to the show, the ghost of a real pirate who died at sea long before the city existed. When he died, he was not given a funeral. His body was used as a window display in a shop on the surface, and because he was never put to rest, his soul has been doomed to haunt the seven seas for the rest of eternity. He carries a handbag marked Souls. He breathes fire from his nose. He is shown, throughout the show, to be one of the most powerful supernatural beings in the ocean, rivaling King Neptune himself in power. He grants wishes. He steals souls. He occasionally bonds with the residents of Bikini Bottom over shared interests. He is, in many ways, the show's quiet acknowledgement that the ocean is older than the city, and that older things still walk through it. The supporting cast around the main characters is enormous, and most of them have small but specific pieces of canon attached to their names. Larry the Lobster is the muscle-bound lifeguard at Goo Lagoon. Old Man Jenkins is the recurring elderly resident who shows up everywhere and seems to have died and come back to life multiple times across the series. Bubble Bass is the demanding customer who, in his most famous appearance, hides a pickle under his tongue to falsely accuse the Krusty Krab of poor service. Each of them is built with the same care that the main cast received, and the city, by the time you have watched all of them in rotation, feels less like a cartoon setting and more like a small town where the same faces keep showing up. That is the lore of Bikini Bottom in its lightest and most canonical form. A man from Anaheim built a comic book about tide pools, took it to animation school school, pitched it to Nickelodeon with a fish tank in his arms, and ended up creating an entire underwater city populated by a sea sponge, a starfish, an octopus, a Texan squirrel in an astronaut suit, a crab who runs a restaurant, a teenage whale daughter whose mother has never been drawn, a copepod with a calculator wife, a pufferfish whose husband became a lamp, a snail with secret royal blood, a ghost pirate haunting the seven seas, and several hundred recurring background fish with names and personalities. The world he built was so detailed that it could carry over 25 years of programming without running out of corners to explore. But the show was always carrying something darker underneath it, and the darker layer was put there on purpose. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The lore of Bikini Bottom ends here. From now on, the video walks through the theories. In the next section, we walk through the real history of Bikini Atoll and the moment a longtime writer admitted the show was originally meant to take place after the surface world had died. Section 6. The theory Hillenburg buried in the name of the city. The name Bikini Bottom is a pun, and the pun is built around a real place. Bikini Atoll is a coral reef in the Marshall Islands, located in the central Pacific Ocean, made up of 23 small islands arranged in a rough oval shape around a central lagoon. It is a real place. It still exists today. It is also one of the most contaminated locations on Earth, and the reason for that contamination is a chapter of human history that until very recently, the SpongeBob writing room treated as a quiet inside joke that they were not willing to fully confirm. In December 2024, that changed, and a fan theory that had been circulating in Reddit threads since at least 2015 was confirmed on the record by a longtime writer of the show. The confirmation came in an Esquire interview with the main cast members, and the implications of what was said in that interview reach all the way back to the very first episode. To understand what was confirmed, you have to understand what actually happened at Bikini Atoll. In the aftermath of World War II, the United Nations placed a vast region of the northern Pacific Ocean under the trusteeship of the United States. That region included the Marshall Islands. The United States government, looking for a remote location to test the next generation of nuclear weapons that had been developed at the end of the war, chose two islands inside the Marshall Chain. One was Enewetak Atoll to the west. The other was Bikini Atoll. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States detonated a total of 67 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands, with 23 of those weapons detonated specifically at Bikini Atoll. The tests included the largest hydrogen bomb the United States ever exploded, a device called Castle Bravo, which was detonated on March 1st, 1954. The Bravo blast was approximately 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The human cost of those tests is something that history books have only recently begun to fully document. In 1946, the United States government removed the indigenous population of Bikini, which numbered 167 people, and relocated them to a smaller atoll called Rongerik. The Bikinians experienced starvation almost immediately because Rongerik did not have the food crops they needed to survive. They were moved again and again. In the 1970s, the United States government returned nearly 200 Bikinians to their home islands, but the people had to be removed again in 1978 because they were found to have ingested more radioactive cesium from the environment than any known human population in history. The Bikini people are now, in the present day, exiles. They have never returned to their original homeland permanently. The land is still considered too contaminated for safe, long-term habitation. The radiation levels in the soil and the surrounding waters remain elevated more than 70 years after the last test was conducted. Every March 1st, the Marshall Islands hold a National Day of Remembrance. School children in the Republic of the Marshall Islands gather every year on the anniversary of the Bravo detonation to remember what happened to their ancestors and to the land their ancestors lost. This is the place that Steven Hillenburg chose in 1997 to name his children's cartoon after. He could have made up any name. He could have invented an underwater geography of his own. He chose a real one, a famous one, and one with a very specific dark history that he, as a marine biologist, would have known about in detail. The choice was not accidental. According to longtime writer and voice actor Mr. Lawrence, who has been with the show since the very first season and who voices Plankton, the connection was always part of the design. In December 2024, Mr. Lawrence appeared in an Esquire interview alongside the main cast of the show. The voice actor Roger Bumpus, who plays Squidward, brought up the long-running fan theory that that Bikini Bottom was related to the atomic testing at Bikini Atoll. Roger Bumpus said he had been telling fans for years that the theory was not true. Mr. Lawrence, sitting next to him, immediately corrected him. The exchange, recorded on video, is short and direct. Roger Bumpus said he always liked the theory that the whole thing was related to the atomic testing in Bikini Atoll. Mr. Lawrence said that it was true. Bumpus, surprised, said that he had been telling people it was not. Mr. Lawrence repeated that yes, it was absolutely true, and that the connection was part of the fun of designing the show. Then Mr. Lawrence said something that pushed the implications even further. He said that, in the very first season, the writers had asked themselves how far they were going to take the concept. He said that the original idea was that the whole world was dead, except for Bikini Bottom. The line is direct. The voice actor Bill Fagerbach, who plays Patrick, asked whether the muffler-shaped houses were part of that concept. Mr. Lawrence said yes. The world upstairs, he said, was gone, and Bikini Bottom was what was left. The implications of what Mr. Lawrence said in that interview are enormous, even though he delivered them casually. According to the original concept of the show, Bikini Bottom is a post-apocalyptic city. The surface world has been destroyed by nuclear war. The fish, sea sponges, starfish, crabs, and octopi who live at the bottom of the ocean have been mutated by the radiation into anthropomorphic creatures who can talk, walk, work, and build houses out of the wreckage of the world above. The mufflers that make up so many of the homes are car parts that fell from the surface after civilization ended. The diving helmets used as mailboxes belonged to humans who died long ago. The anchors used as lampposts came from ships that sank when the world ended. The reason fire works underwater is because the radiation broke the rules of physics in this region of the sea. The reason a sea sponge can talk and a starfish can attend boating school is because the genetic structure of every species in the area has been permanently altered. This explains, retroactively, a number of design choices that previously seemed like random comedy. The shape of every explosion in the show is a mushroom cloud. The mushroom cloud is the visual signature of a nuclear blast. Every time something blows up in Bikini Bottom, from the ovens at the Krusty Krab to Plankton's failed inventions, the explosion takes the shape of a hydrogen bomb. Fans noticed this for years. The episode Dying for Pie has an explosion that closely resembles a real photograph of the Baker test, which was detonated underwater at Bikini Atoll on July 25, 1946, and which produced a distinctive, photographically documented mushroom cloud rising from the surface of the lagoon. The Baker test was the first time a nuclear weapon was ever detonated underwater. The shape it produced is the shape every SpongeBob explosion has been replicating, on purpose, for over 25 years. The theory, before it was confirmed, also pointed to a specific location inside the show. The city of Rock Bottom, which SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally visit in the Season 1 episode of the same name, is described by fans as being shaped like a deep crater. The road down to Rock Bottom is exactly 90 degrees down, according to canon. Everything is pitch black except for a few streetlights. The deep-sea creatures who live there speak a barely intelligible version of English, blowing a raspberry between every 2 to 4 syllables. According to the post-nuclear theory, Rock Bottom is the literal blast crater left behind by an underwater detonation. The deep-sea creatures who live there are residents of the most contaminated zone. The strange physics of the city, the way the bus schedule seems to actively work against SpongeBob, the way light behaves differently, the way the residents speak in a barely intelligible language, all of these design choices fit a reading of Rock Bottom as a place where the radiation was strongest, where the mutation was deepest, and where the world above is most thoroughly forgotten. There is a related fan reading that extends the theory further. Some Reddit users have argued that the residents of Rock Bottom and the monsters of Shell City are not mutated at all. They are ordinary fish and ordinary sea creatures who lived far enough away from the original blasts to have escaped the radiation. The strangeness of Bikini Bottom, by this reading, is not normal. It is a localized effect. The further you travel from the city, the more the world starts to look like the actual ocean again. The talking, the building, the boat driving, all of it is contained inside the small region of the Pacific that absorbed the worst of the testing. Outside that region, ordinary marine life continues to exist. The theory is internally consistent with the show, even though the show itself has never explicitly confirmed it. Every other location in the show extends from this same logic. Bass Vegas, New Kelp City, the Dirty Bubble, Tentacle Acres, the Flying Dutchman, who is an actual ghost of a sailor who died at sea reality long before the war ended the surface world. The episodes that involve fishing hooks, where the residents of Bikini Bottom panic at the appearance of a hook in the water, become harder to read as comedy once you know that the original concept assumed the surface world was dead. If the surface is dead, there should not be any humans left to fish. The show has been inconsistent about this, and the inconsistency is real. In the first feature film, David Hasselhoff appears as a literal human surface dweller who carries SpongeBob and Patrick across the ocean on his back. In other episodes, like Pre-Hibernation Week and Frankendoodle, surface humans are clearly present and active. The post-apocalyptic original concept does not match what eventually became the show, and Mr. Lawrence himself acknowledged this in the Esquire interview. He said that the concept was where the writers started, but that the show, over the years, drifted away from that strict reading. The current version of the show treats the surface as alive, even though the original concept assumed it was dead. Both readings are now technically canon. The show carries them both at once. Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob himself, had previously, in earlier interviews, denied the nuclear theory. He had confirmed that Bikini Bottom was named after Bikini Atoll, but denied that the show had any connection to the real-world testing. Kenny's denial held for years, and most casual fans accepted it. Mr. Lawrence's December 2024 confirmation directly contradicts it. The official Nickelodeon position, for years, has been to neither fully confirm nor fully deny. In 2021, an anonymous staff member, speaking to Cracked magazine, said that the theory was treated as well-accepted fan fiction inside the network's creative promotions department. People who worked on or adjacent to the show talked about the theory casually. Nobody officially said yes. In December 2024, Mr. Lawrence finally said yes on camera, and the words are now sitting in the public record. In 2019, a University of Washington anthropology professor named Holly M. Barker published an academic article titled "Unsettling SpongeBob and the Legacies of Violence on Bikini Bottom." The article argued that because Bikini Bottom is named after a real place where indigenous people were displaced by the United States government for nuclear testing, the cheerful underwater city promotes a kind of soft colonialism. The argument is academic, and it is not the same as the post-apocalyptic fan theory, but it sits in the same conceptual neighborhood. The cartoon city is named after a real ruin. The cartoon residents are anthropomorphic survivors of a real history. The Bikinians, the actual people who lived on the actual atoll, have never returned home. Children all over the world know the name Bikini Bottom by heart. Almost none of them know who the Bikinians are or what happened to them. The thing that makes all of this strange, rather than simply dark, is that the show was never advertised as post-apocalyptic. It is a children's cartoon. It is bright, cheerful, and full of laughter. SpongeBob himself is one of the most relentlessly optimistic characters in animation history. The world in which he lives, by the original design of his creator, is the world that exists after everything else has ended. He is a cheerful sea sponge, living in a pineapple, working as a fry cook, blowing bubbles, catching jellyfish, and learning to drive a boatmobile on top of the ruins of a civilization that used the ocean above his head as a weapons testing range. The cheerfulness is the foreground, the apocalypse is the background. Both are true, and the show has always been holding both at the same time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The post-apocalyptic origin is the deepest piece of dark canon the show has produced, but the fan base has built a second layer of theories about the residents themselves. In the next section, we walk through the theories about SpongeBob, the sponge who might be a god. Section 7, the theories about SpongeBob himself, the sponge who might be a god. The fan theories about Bikini Bottom as a place are the easiest to take seriously because they are grounded in a real geography that any viewer can look up on a map. The theories about the residents themselves are stranger and more personal. They involve psychology, philosophy, and the kind of close reading that only happens when a fan base has spent 25 years watching the same show and noticing the same small details. The theories about SpongeBob himself are some of the strangest in the entire fan canon, because the character is, on the surface, the simplest one in the cast. He is a cheerful sponge in a pineapple. He works as a fry cook. He loves his friends. He laughs constantly. There should be nothing to theorize about. And yet, the fan base has, over the years, produced readings of SpongeBob that suggest he might be a savant, a god, a hallucinogenic addict, an immortal creature, a vehicle for an environment environmental metaphor, an autistic adult, or, in one of the strangest readings, the 7 deadly sins all rolled into a single yellow body. The first major theory about SpongeBob himself is the savant theory, which is one of the older fan readings on the internet. The argument was first articulated in detail on Reddit, and it has been repeated and expanded in dozens of video essays since. The reading is simple. SpongeBob, across the run of the show, has demonstrated mastery of an enormous range of complex skills with very little training. He is a master fry cook who can produce hundreds of patties in seconds. He is an accomplished bubble blower who can create bubbles in the shape of almost any object. He is a competitive jellyfisher. He has shown skill in karate, ice sculpture, sandcastle building, choreographed dance, musical performance, and dozens of other disciplines. The Reddit argument was that SpongeBob is, by every observable measure, one of the most gifted creatures shown on television. He picks up complex skills almost instantly. He performs them at a level of artistry that surprises everyone around him. And yet he chooses to work as a fry cook for a crab who underpays him. The savant reading frames SpongeBob as a kind of holy fool, a being of incredible natural ability who has chosen, out of sheer love for the simple things in life, to never use that ability for personal advancement. He could be a master artist. He could be a competitive athlete. He could run his own restaurant. He chooses instead to flip patties and feed jellyfish and make his snail laugh. The reading is partly admiring and partly tragic. It treats SpongeBob's joy as the result of a deliberate refusal to chase the kind of ambition that would have made him miserable. He is happy because he has never asked himself whether he should want more. A more disturbing extension of the savant theory is the SpongeBob as God reading. The argument here is that SpongeBob is not just gifted, he is metaphysically lucky in a way that suggests something deeper. Across the run of the show, things go his way to a degree that defies probability. He survives explosions. He survives being eaten. He survives being trapped underwater without water. He survives being chased by surface fishermen. The world bends for him. People who try to hurt him fail. Even his enemies eventually become his friends. Squidward hates him for years and ends up, in some episodes, genuinely caring for him. Plankton hates him for years and ends up, in the Plankton movie, working with him to save the city. The argument is that something about SpongeBob is operating outside the normal rules of the universe, and that the show, when you read it this way, is the story of a small yellow god disguised as a fry cook. Both of these readings find their counterweight in one specific episode that is uncomfortable for SpongeBob fans to think about. The episode is called Gone, from season 7. The premise is simple. SpongeBob wakes up one morning and discovers that everyone in Bikini Bottom has disappeared. The city is empty. He spends the entire episode trying to figure out where everyone went. At the end, he discovers the truth. The residents of Bikini Bottom have not disappeared. They have all gone on vacation together to a special holiday. The holiday is called National No SpongeBob Day. It is, as the name suggests, a day where the entire population of the city collectively agrees to leave so that they do not have to be around SpongeBob for 24 hours. Even Patrick, his best friend, admits that he occasionally needs a day away from him. The flashback that ends the episode shows the residents of the city dancing on the ashes of a SpongeBob effigy. Squidward kicks the ashes around with a grin on his face. SpongeBob, characteristically, fails to understand what he is looking at and assumes that the holiday is a celebration in his honor. Gone is one of the most uncomfortable episodes of the show because it acknowledges, on screen, that SpongeBob's joy is something the people around him have to actively recover from. The cheerful sponge that the savant theory treats as a holy fool and the God theory treats as a metaphysical force is also, in canon, a person whose presence is so much that the entire city has organized a yearly event to escape him. The contradiction is the show. It is possible to read SpongeBob as both a gift and a burden simultaneously, and the show, in Gone, deliberately holds both readings at once. The theory that has gathered the most cultural traction in recent years is the 7 Deadly Sins reading. The original version of this theory was posted on Reddit by a user named cucumber_d, who argued that each of the main characters in the show represents one of the 7 deadly sins of Christian theology. The reading lines up surprisingly well. Mr. Krabs is greed, obsessed with money to the point of cartoon parody. Plankton is envy, consumed by jealousy of his former best friend's success. Squidward is wrath, perpetually angry at everyone around him. Patrick is sloth, sleeping under a rock and avoiding effort whenever possible. Sandy is pride, constantly boasting about her intelligence. toughness, her strength, and her superior knowledge. Gary is gluttony, perpetually meowing for more food. SpongeBob is lust, although the reading here is the loosest of the 7, because SpongeBob's lust is not romantic, but a kind of overwhelming hunger for life itself. The 7 deadly sins theory has been around for years, and it would have stayed in the realm of fan speculation if Mr. Lawrence had not, in the same December 2024 Esquire interview, where he confirmed the post-apocalyptic theory, also acknowledged that the 7 deadly sins reading had merit. He did not say the writers had built the show around the framework on purpose. He said only that the alignment was there, that the fans had noticed it, and that he found the reading interesting. That partial confirmation has been enough to push the theory from speculation into the gray area where the show neither confirms nor denies its own subtext, and the fans are left to draw their own conclusions about whether the writers were always doing this on purpose. The drug theory is older and more controversial, and it has been articulated in multiple versions across the years. The simplest version argues that each main character represents the effects of a different drug. SpongeBob, with his vast imagination, his wild emotional swings, and his ability to perceive things that nobody else can perceive, represents hallucinogens. Squidward, with his moodiness, his deception, and his tendency to nod off at his cash register, represents heroin. Patrick, with his laziness, his constant hunger, and his cheerful confusion, represents marijuana. Mr. Krabs and Mrs. Puff, with their paranoia and their twitchy energy, represent cocaine. The argument is partly tongue-in-cheek and partly serious. The personalities of the main characters do, when you squint at them, line up with the stereotypical effects of recreational drugs. The writers have never confirmed this reading, and most fans treat it as a joke, but the alignment is consistent enough that the theory keeps coming back every few years. A darker variation of the drug theory frames SpongeBob himself not as a recreational user, but as a chronic addict whose joy is artificial. The reading is that the show is a portrait of a creature in a permanent dissociative state, that his constant cheerfulness is a coping mechanism for a life that would otherwise be unbearable, and that the surreal moments of the show, where reality itself seems to bend, are not magical realism, but the visible symptoms of a mind that is no longer fully connected to the world it lives in. Most viewers reject this reading because it is too dark for what is fundamentally a children's cartoon, but the reading exists. It has been articulated. It is part of the fan canon now. The most tender of the SpongeBob-focused theories is the autism reading. The argument here is that SpongeBob, as written, displays a number of traits that align with autism spectrum behaviors. He has a deep, sustained, almost obsessive interest in a small set of subjects. He is fascinated by jellyfish. He is fascinated by his job. He is fascinated by Krabby Patties. He memorizes facts about these subjects with an intensity that exceeds what the social situations around him require. He has difficulty reading social cues, particularly from Squidward. He misinterprets sarcasm as sincerity. He repeats favorite phrases. He has fixed routines, particularly around his morning preparation for work, and becomes visibly distressed when those routines are disrupted. He is innocent in a way that suggests not naivety, but a different kind of cognitive processing, where the social games that other characters play simply do not register. The autism reading is one of the most widely shared in the SpongeBob fandom, particularly among autistic viewers themselves, who see in him a portrayal that, even if unintentional, captures something they recognize. The writers have never confirmed this reading either, but unlike the drug theory, the autism reading is largely embraced by the fanbase as a positive interpretation of the character. A separate theory that exists outside the character readings is the SpongeBob as environmental metaphor reading. The argument, articulated in detail by Cracked Magazine and other publications over the years, is that SpongeBob is not, despite appearances, a sea sponge. He is a kitchen sponge, and a kitchen sponge is a tool used by humans to clean up their own filth. By this reading, SpongeBob represents human waste and pollution that has fallen into the ocean and somehow gained sentience. The theory extends to the rest of the cast. Mr. Krabs, as SpongeBob's employer, represents the large corporations that produce the pollution. Patrick, as SpongeBob's best friend, represents Western civilization, which lives alongside the pollution and remains oblivious to it. Squidward represents indigenous marine life, the original residents of the ocean, displaced and embittered by the arrival of human waste. The reading is an environmental allegory that the show has never confirmed, but it lines up with Hillenburg's marine biology background and his stated desire to make children think about the ocean. The strangest and least defended of the SpongeBob theories is the immortality reading. The argument is that SpongeBob, like real sea sponges, is functionally immortal. Real sea sponges, in real biology, do not have many of the standard signs of aging that other animals experience. They can live for thousands of years under the right conditions. The Antarctic glass sponge in particular has been documented to live for over 10,000 years. By this reading, SpongeBob is not a young adult at all. He is an ancient creature wearing the appearance of youth. He has lived through eras of Bikini Bottom that the show has never depicted. He has watched friends and acquaintances die. He has chosen, at some point in his long life, to maintain a state of permanent cheerfulness as a way of coping with the weight of all the time he has lived through. The reading is unprovable. The show has never confirmed it, but it makes a strange, sad sense once you have heard it, and it sits in the corner of the fan canon, waiting for someone to take it seriously. The contradiction at the center of all of these theories is that SpongeBob himself, as a character, refuses to confirm or deny any of them. He is too cheerful, too simple, too direct in his joy for any of the dark readings to fully stick. When the fanbase tries to project a hidden meaning onto him, the character itself seems to slide out from underneath the projection. He is just a sponge. He is just happy. He is just trying to fry his patties and walk his snail and blow his bubbles. And the rest of the analysis is something that happens in the heads of the viewers, not on the screen. That gap between what the character is and what the audience needs him to be is part of why he has lasted 25 years. He is a screen that any reading can be projected onto, and the projections never quite stick to him. He is always, by the next episode, just SpongeBob again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The theories about SpongeBob are mostly affectionate. The theories about the Krusty Krab are not. In the next section, we walk through the grimmest fan reading in the entire fandom, the photograph on Mr. Krabs' wall, and the disappearance Hillenburg refused to ever explain. Section 8, the theories about the Krabby Patty and the Pearl Mother mystery. The fan readings of SpongeBob himself tend to land somewhere between affectionate and concerned. The fan readings of the Krusty Krab are different. They are darker, more specific, and they have produced what is, by most measures, the single grimmest sustained fan theory in the entire SpongeBob universe. The theory is that the Krabby Patty contains the body of Pearl's missing mother, and that the entire economic engine of Bikini Bottom is built on a piece of cannibalism that the show has been quietly hinting at for over 25 years. The theory is wrong by every official statement the writers have ever issued. It is also, when you trace its components carefully, the most internally consistent dark theory the fanbase has ever assembled, and the show keeps producing new evidence for it almost by accident. The theory begins with the Krusty Krab training video, which we discussed earlier in this video. The narrator of that episode says, in passing, that Mr. Krabs returned from the war and stayed secluded in a deep depression that seemed endless. The line has weight, the fans noticed. Then, in the season 1 episode Wet Painters, Mr. Krabs has a small framed photograph in his house. The photograph shows a giant whale near a sailboat. The composition of the photograph mirrors a famous illustration from the novel Moby Dick, in which a whaler hunts an enormous white whale across the open ocean. The photograph hangs on Mr. Krabs' wall as a piece of household decoration. The fans notice that too. The theory builds outward from there. Pearl, in canon, is a sperm whale. According to the official trivia book written by former episode writer David Fain in 2000, Pearl's mother, the never-seen Mrs. Krabs, is also a whale, and Mr. Krabs has stated that Pearl takes after her mother. Mrs. Krabs has never been drawn. She has never been seen. She has never been referenced by name. Steven Hillenburg, before his death, refused to allow the writers to ever explain what happened to her. A plot outline for an episode focused on Pearl's origin was written during season 5 and entered early development. Hillenburg shut it down. The episode was shelved permanently. Mrs. Krabs, in the canon of the show, is simply gone, and the reason for her absence has never been provided. The dark theory says she is in the patties. The argument, as it has been made on Reddit and on the SpongeBob fan wikis over the years, runs as follows. Mr. Krabs went to war. The war left him in a deep depression. The Krusty Krab training video is explicit about this. He came back to Bikini Bottom carrying something heavy. Then, somewhere in his life, he met Mrs. Krabs, married her, and had Pearl. Mrs. Krabs disappeared. The whale photograph on his wall, the Moby Dick reference, is treated by fans as a clue. The Krabby Patty, the food that built his entire fortune, has a secret formula that has never been revealed. The Krusty Krab is named after Mr. Krabs, but the patty is named Krabby, not crab. The pun in this reading is the wrong species. The patty is not crab meat. The patty is whale meat. Mrs. Krabs, Pearl's mother, was the source. Mr. Krabs has been grinding her body into the food he sells to the residents of Bikini Bottom for years. The theory is gruesome. It is also, by every official statement the show has ever issued, completely false. Vincent Waller, the showrunner, has stated multiple times that there is no meat in the Krabby Patty at all, no animal product whatsoever, and that Stephen Hillenburg specifically designed the patty to be a vegetable burger. Mr. Lawrence has said the same thing. The writers are not allowed to depict fish being eaten as food in most contexts. The Krabby Patty is, in canon, a meatless burger. The whale theory is fan fiction. The fact that the theory exists at all, however, says something about how the show's canon has been received. The pieces are all real. The Krusty Krab training video really does describe a deep, lasting depression. Mrs. Krabs really has been excluded from the show on purpose for over 25 years. The Moby Dick photograph really hangs on Mr. Krabs' wall in wet painters. The patty's secret ingredient really has never been revealed. Hillenburg really did refuse to allow Pearl's origin story to ever be filmed. The fans have taken these real pieces of canon, all of which point at gaps and absences in the official story, and they have filled the gaps with the darkest possible answer. The show, by refusing to provide its own answers, has left room for the fan base to invent worse ones. A related variation of the theory was articulated by John Negroni, the creator of the well-known Pixar theory, who applied the same close-reading approach to SpongeBob. Negroni pointed out that Mr. Krabs has, in canon, an unusual and intense fear of fishhooks, which the show explores in detail in the Season 2 episode, Hooky. The fear is treated as comedic in the episode, but Negroni argued that the depth of the fear suggests a personal history. By this reading, Pearl's mother was killed by a fishhook, pulled to the surface, and never returned. Mr. Krabs would have been there to witness it, or at least to learn about it afterward. His fear of hooks is, in this reading, not paranoia, but trauma. The theory is consistent with the canon, although it has never been confirmed. The official positions on Pearl's mother are as careful as the theory is grim. Lori Allen, the voice of Pearl, was asked at a public event about the question of Pearl's mother. According to attendees, she did not give a direct answer. She said that the topic made her emotional, and she changed the subject. Roger Bumpus, the voice of Squidward, was at the same event. He cracked a joke. He said that Mrs. Krabs had been taken to an oceanarium, and he deadpanned the words SeaWorld as the punchline. The cast knows the question. The cast knows the question is uncomfortable. The show has trained itself, over 25 years, to never answer it. The other side of the Krabby Patty theory is the simpler, older variation that argues the patty is made of crab meat rather than whale meat. The reading, articulated on dozens of fan forums, points out that Mr. Krabs and his mother are essentially the only crabs ever shown on screen in any major capacity. The other residents of Bikini Bottom are fish, sea sponges, starfish, octopi, and so on. Crabs are, in the world of the show, almost entirely absent from the population. The dark argument is that the absence is not a coincidence. The crabs of Bikini Bottom are not absent because they never existed. They are absent because Mr. Krabs has been grinding them into patties for years. The pun in the name Krabby Patty is, by this reading, literal. The patty contains crab. Mr. Krabs is, in this reading, a cannibal who built a restaurant empire on the bodies of his own species. This theory, like the whale theory, is officially false. The vegetarian canon disqualifies it, but the visual evidence the fans cite is real. Crabs really are missing from the show. Mr. Krabs really is, with the exception of his mother, the only major crab character. The midlife crustacean episode, which we discussed earlier, includes a brief shot of a house labeled Mom's House, with a crab claw visible in the background, which fans have read as a clue, though it is more easily interpreted as a simple gag about Mr. Krabs' mother being a crab. The pieces sit together loosely. The canon disqualifies them. The fans keep arranging them anyway. A third variation, argued by a Reddit user in a long thread that became popular around 2018, is the whale barf theory. The argument is that the Krabby Patty does not contain meat in any traditional sense, but that the secret ingredient is ambergris, which is a real-world substance produced by sperm whales as a kind of digestive byproduct. Ambergris is extremely valuable in real life. It has been used historically in perfume manufacturing. The Reddit argument was that Mr. Krabs has been harvesting ambergris from Pearl, his own daughter, and using it as the secret ingredient. The theory was articulated as a darkly humorous reading rather than a serious one, but it has the same same structural shape as the whale theory. Pearl is a sperm whale. The Krabby Patty has a secret ingredient. The secret ingredient is, by this reading, something Pearl produces involuntarily. The reading is grim. It is also, like the others, contradicted by the vegetarian canon, since Vincent Waller has made clear that the patty contains no animal product whatsoever. The deeper question that the patty theories raise is why the show has refused, for so long, to ever directly answer the question of what is in the formula. Hillenburg's stated reason was that the mystery was the point. He wanted the formula to remain unsolved. Vincent Waller has confirmed in interviews that the writers actively avoid revealing the recipe, that the gibberish ingredients shown in Krabby Road were written that way on purpose, specifically to prevent any audience member from decoding the patty, and that the showrunner has no plans to ever change this. The mystery, in their view, is part of what makes the show work. Once you reveal the secret, the patty becomes a thing rather than an idea, and the entire economic engine of Bikini Bottom loses some of its weight. The writers have chosen, deliberately, to leave the answer permanently unanswered. The Pearl mystery is harder to defend. Pearl is, in canon, motherless, and the absence of her mother shapes every quiet, emotional moment in the show that involves Mr. Krabs and his daughter. Whale of a Birthday, the season 4 episode where Mr. Krabs throws Pearl a birthday party and goes to extreme lengths to make it special, is one of the most touching pieces of writing the show has ever produced, and the touch comes specifically from the absence of a mother in the room. Mr. Krabs is doing all of the parenting himself. He has been doing all of the parenting himself for years. Pearl loves him for it, even when she is embarrassed by him, and the show treats their relationship with a tenderness that the rest of the writing around Mr. Krabs rarely matches. The reason Hillenburg refused to ever explain Mrs. Krabs has never been fully articulated. According to Vincent Waller, the request came up over and over again, both from fans and from the writers themselves, and Hillenburg shut it down every time. The most likely explanation, which Waller has hinted at in interviews, is that Hillenburg believed the absence itself was the point. Pearl is named for her mother. Mr. Krabs' catchphrase, "Mother of Pearl," invokes the mother every time he uses it. The mother is, in the structure of the show, present everywhere by being absent. To draw her, to give her a face and a voice and a backstory, would be to flatten the strange, quiet weight that her absence carries through the entire run of the series. Hillenburg, in this reading, was protecting the negative space. He understood that some absences are more powerful than presences, and he refused to fill in the gap that he had spent the entire show building around. The fanbase will never accept this. The fanbase will keep arguing about Mrs. Krabs forever. New theories will surface every year. The whale theory will keep coming back. The hook theory will keep coming back. The ambergris theory will keep coming back. Every time the show airs another episode that involves Pearl, fans will scan it for clues. The cast will keep deflecting the question at conventions. Lori Allen will keep getting emotional. Roger Bumpus will keep cracking the SeaWorld joke. The mother in the safe will stay in the safe. The recipe in the safe will stay in the safe. The Krusty Krab will keep selling patties. The residents of Bikini Bottom will keep eating them. And the fan base will keep circling the gap that Hillenburg deliberately left in the middle of the show, looking for something that he made sure they would never find. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Krabby Patty theories live inside the show's canon. The darkest theory in the entire SpongeBob universe lives outside it. In the next section, we walk through the Squidward suicide creepypasta, the Red Mist tape, and the day in 2019 the show stared back. Section 9. Squidward's suicide, the Red Mist tape, and the day the show stared back. The story begins on April 6, 2010, on a forum called 7chan, in a subforum called Paranormal. An anonymous user posted a long piece of writing claiming to be a confession. The user said he had been, in 2005, an intern at Nickelodeon Studios, working with the editors and animators on the SpongeBob SquarePants production team, completing his degree in animation. He said he had been in the editing room one afternoon with 2 other interns and several lead animators and sound editors, gathered around a screen to watch what was supposed to be the rough cut of an episode called Fear of a Krabby Patty, which would be the season 4 premiere. He said the cassette tape they put into the player did not display the title Fear of a Krabby Patty when it began to play. The title that came up instead on a black title card was Squidward's Suicide. The story in the original post is written with the calm, methodical tone of a witness account. The intern says the team initially initially assumed the title was a morbid in-joke from the animators. He says they had seen this kind of thing before, with rough cuts sometimes carrying placeholder titles meant as throwaway gags. He says they decided to keep watching. The episode that played, according to the story, was not a rough cut of Fear of a Krabby Patty. It was something else entirely. The episode, as described in the post, opens with Squidward practicing his clarinet. He hits a few sour notes. SpongeBob and Patrick laugh outside. Squidward yells at them to be quiet because he has a concert that night. The story is, up to this point, a normal SpongeBob episode. Then Squidward's performance at the concert begins. He plays badly. The audience boos him. The camera pans across the audience, and the eyes of the fish in the crowd, including SpongeBob and Patrick, are not the cartoon eyes of the show. They are described, in the post, as hyper-realistic eyes, with red pupils, photographed and edited into the animation in a way that makes them feel like actual human eyes pasted onto cartoon faces. Squidward walks home with his head in his tentacles. He sits in his bedroom. He cries. The crying does not sound like Squidward. The post describes it as sounding like a real person, sobbing, recorded outside of any cartoon context. The story continues. Squidward, sitting in his bed, lifts his face from his hands. His eyes are now the same hyper-realistic eyes from the audience. Blood drips from them. Photographs flash on the screen, between cuts, of deceased children. The post describes the photographs in disturbing detail. They are unsettling. They are not animated. They are presented as if they were real. The crying gets louder. A voice in the background, deep and inhuman, says the words, "Do it." Squidward reaches under his bed. He pulls out a weapon. A moment later, the screen goes black. According to the original post, 3 of the animators in the editing room were sent to the hospital after watching the episode. One editor retired immediately. One of the other interns, a young woman, experienced a severe mental health crisis shortly afterward. The narrator of the story, the one writing the post, was the only intern present that day who remained without hospitalization. The tape was sent to the police. The police, according to the story, investigated and determined that the tape had been edited and submitted by a man named Andrew Skinner, a Scottish animator who had been working remotely on the show. Skinner was arrested. He was charged with multiple counts of murder, including the murders of the 2 children whose photographs appeared in the episode. The story ends with the narrator saying that he has spent the years since trying to forget what he saw, and that he is finally writing the story down because he cannot keep it inside any longer. None of this is true. There was no intern. There was no animator named Andrew Skinner. There were no dead children. The tape does not exist. The story is fiction. It is one of the most successful and widely circulated pieces of writing in the entire genre of internet horror writing called creepypasta, a term that comes from the phrase copy and paste, and that refers to short horror stories designed to be repeated, reposted, and retold across forums and chat threads. Squidward's suicide, also commonly called Red Mist, after a related and slightly later piece of writing that built on the original story, became one of the foundational pieces of the lost episode subgenre of creepypasta. The lost episode subgenre involves stories about cartoon series, usually beloved children's cartoons, that have allegedly produced a single horrifying, unaired episode, usually preserved on a cursed tape, usually involving a beloved character dying violently. There are lost episode creepypastas about Mickey Mouse, Rugrats, Dexter's Laboratory, and dozens of other shows. Squidward's suicide is, by most measures, the most famous of all of them. The story spread quickly. By 2011, it had been reposted across hundreds of horror forums and websites. The image that came to be associated with the story, which is sometimes called Red Mist Squidward, shows a still of Squidward's face from the season 3 episode Just One Bite, modified with red, glowing eyes and a desaturated background. The image became one of the most recognizable creepypasta images on the internet. It appeared in YouTube horror compilation videos. It was traded as a kind of underground meme. People who had never read the original story still recognized the image, and the image alone became enough to evoke the entire fictional horror. The reasons the story worked, even though it was clearly fiction, are worth pausing on. The first reason is that SpongeBob, as a show, has always carried a faint undercurrent of darkness underneath its cheerful surface. The post-apocalyptic origin of Bikini Bottom, the torn recipe at the heart of the Krusty Krab, the missing mother in the Krabs family, the depression of Mr. Krabs after the war, the husband of Mrs. Puff who was turned into a lamp, the fishhook horror stories that fish parents tell their children, children. None of these elements are explicitly horror, but they are all, taken together, a kind of soft architecture of grief that runs underneath the show. A creepypasta that turned that grief explicit, that took the loneliest character in the show and gave him the ending that the show had spent years quietly hinting he might want, fit into the architecture too cleanly to feel completely fake. The Squidward suicide story was not believable as a real lost episode. It was believable as a fan's emotional reading of the show. The second reason is that Squidward, of all the characters in the show, was the most natural target for this kind of story. He is the unhappiest character in the cast. He is the only one who experiences his life as a long disappointment. He is a failed musician. He is a failed artist. He lives between two neighbors who, in his perception, exist primarily to make his life worse. His expressions, particularly his moments of quiet despair, were already memes by the time the creepypasta arrived. The image of Squidward looking exhausted at his cash register, or staring out the window of his bedroom while SpongeBob and Patrick laugh outside, was already part of the cultural shorthand for adult depression by the late 2000s. The creepypasta did not have to invent a new emotional register for him. It simply had to push the existing register one step further. The fans had already done most of the work. The strangest part of the story is what happened next. In December 2019, Nickelodeon aired an episode called SpongeBob in Randomland, the 56th episode of season 12. The episode involves SpongeBob and Squidward traveling to a strange dimension where each door leads to a warped, alternate universe version of themselves. They open multiple doors. Each one shows a different, distorted variation of a familiar character. One of the doors, in the original cut of the episode, opens to reveal a version of Squidward sitting in a dimly lit bedroom with red eyes, staring directly at the camera in a pose that exactly replicates the famous red mist Squidward image. The reference was deliberate. The episode was written by Kaz, and the storyboard was directed by Adam Poloyan. Poloyan himself confirmed in interviews afterward that the scene was a direct reference to the creepypasta. He had originally wanted to push the reference even further, with the face zooming closer and closer until Squidward slammed the door shut. The red mist Squidward shot was approved by Vincent Waller, the showrunner. The show was, in this episode, openly acknowledging the existence of the fictional horror story that had been circulating in its fan base for almost a decade. The reference did not last. Beginning in November 2019, after the original airing, the scene was censored. UK and Ireland airings replaced the red mist Squidward shot with a brief animation of a baby version of Squidward soiling his diaper. Later United States airings did the same. The original version remained intact on the Nick app and on certain international airings, but the broadcast version was edited. Nickelodeon's Standards and Practices Department, which had not flagged the scene before it aired, flagged it afterward. The scene was deemed too disturbing, too direct in its reference to a piece of writing that involved a fictional suicide and fictional photographs of dead children, and too likely to encourage curious children to look up the original story. The red mist Squidward image, after a brief window of canonical existence on a Nickelodeon broadcast, was removed from the show's official airings. Adam Poloyan, in response to the censorship, said that he found it kind of fun. Vincent Waller, in subsequent interviews, has been clear that the original creepypasta is not canon to the show. He has called it ridiculous fan fiction. He has said that the only canon connection is the show poking fun at the existence of the story. The red mist Squidward who appears in Randomland, even before the censorship, was not the same Squidward from the creepypasta. He was, in the show's universe, simply an alternate dimension variant who happened to look like the famous fan-made image. But the wink was there. The show, after almost 10 years of pretending the creepypasta did not exist, finally acknowledged that it did. And then, almost immediately, the network walked the acknowledgement back. There is a smaller, quieter follow-up to this story. In a season 13 episode called A Place for Pets, Squidward faces the camera at one point with two red soda cups stuck in his eye sockets. The visual subtly resembles red mist Squidward. It may be a coincidence. It may be another quiet wink from the show's storyboard team. The fans have noticed. Nobody at Nickelodeon has confirmed or denied the reference. The image sits in the show's catalog as a possible second acknowledgement, slipped past standards and practices without being flagged because, this time, the reference was vague enough to deny. The Red Mist story is one of two large pieces of dark fan culture that the SpongeBob fanbase has built. It is also, in some ways, the strangest piece of fan culture in the show's history, because the show itself, for for one brief moment in 2019, accepted it. Vincent Waller approved the scene. The storyboard director drew it deliberately. The episode aired. Children watched it. And then, within weeks, the network erased it from its own broadcasts and replaced it with a baby version of Squidward soiling himself, which is a sentence that nobody, including the creators of SpongeBob SquarePants, ever expected to be true. The deeper question that the Red Mist canonization raises is what the show owes to its own fan base. The fans took the architecture of grief that Hillenburg had built into the show and turned it into a lost episode horror story. The show, for one moment, acknowledged that the fans had done this. The acknowledgement was then taken back. The fan base has read this entire sequence, the original story, the canonization, the censorship, as a single long conversation between the show and its audience about how dark the show has always been allowed to be. The official position is that the show is for children. The unofficial position, embedded in the muffler-shaped houses and the missing mother and the war veteran restaurateur and the post-apocalyptic origin and the lamp husband and the suicidal plankton on the bus road and the creepypasta that briefly became canon, is that the show has always been carrying more weight than its surface suggests. The Red Mist incident, more than any other single moment in the show's history, made that weight visible. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Squidward suicide creepypasta lives outside the canon, but the show has its own piece of darkness hiding in plain sight since season 1. In the final section, we walk through the prehistoric past of the city, the remaining theories, and the strange permanence of Bikini Bottom. Section 10, the prehistoric past, the final theories, and the strange permanence of Bikini Bottom. There is one piece of canon that almost nobody talks about when they talk about Bikini Bottom, and it is the piece that pushes the timeline of the show further back than any of the dark theories ever quite reach. It is the prehistoric past of the city, established in 2 specific episodes that aired years apart, and that, taken together, suggest that the residents of Bikini Bottom are not the first wave of intelligent sea creatures to live in this region of the Pacific. They are part of a much longer line, one that stretches back hundreds of millions of years, and that has been continuing in some form since long before the surface world ever existed. The first of these episodes is called SB-129, the 14th episode of season 1, which aired on December 31st, 1999. The premise is built around time travel. Squidward, trying to escape SpongeBob and Patrick on a Sunday morning, accidentally locks himself inside the freezer at the Krusty Krab. He is frozen for 2,000 years. When he is unfrozen, he finds himself in a futuristic version of Bikini Bottom, populated by chrome robots and floating buildings. He gets confused, presses a button on a time machine, and travels accidentally into the deep prehistoric past of the same region. There, he encounters 2 creatures who look exactly like SpongeBob and Patrick, except they are primitive. They have sloping foreheads, large overbite teeth, and they wear only loincloths. They cannot speak. They communicate in grunts and squeals. They are afraid of jellyfish. They scream when they see them, and they run away. And then one of them picks the jellyfish up and gets stung repeatedly because it does not understand what is causing the pain. The episode is played for comedy, but the implication is straightforward. The ancestors of SpongeBob and Patrick existed in the prehistoric ocean. They were primitive. They were small in number. They were already, even in their primitive state, recognizably the same species that would, hundreds of millions of years later, become the residents of Bikini Bottom. The show treats this as a one-off joke, but the canon is now established. There were sea sponges and starfish in the prehistoric ocean, and they were, in some early form, already on the path to becoming what SpongeBob and Patrick are today. The follow-up to SB-129 is an episode called Ugh, which aired on March 5th, 2004, as a special 22-minute single segment. The episode revisits the prehistoric setting and gives it more depth. The prehistoric versions of SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward are, by this point in canonical time, more advanced than they were in SB-129. They have developed clothing. They have a simple language. They have domesticated animals, including a prehistoric version of Gary the Snail, who is much larger than the modern Gary. They have houses. SpongeBob's prehistoric ancestor, named SpongeGar, lives in a stone house shaped like a pineapple, which establishes that the pineapple as home tradition in the family stretches back into prehistory. Patrick's ancestor, named Patar, is a starfish. Squidward's ancestor, named Squog, is an octopus. The episode is built around the discovery of fire, which the 3 of them argue over until the fire is washed away by water, and they all sadly realize that their friendship matters more than the thing they were fighting over. The episode is mostly comedic, but the canon it establishes is significant. The civilization of Bikini Bottom is, in some form, ancient. The species that live there have been developing intelligence and culture for hundreds of millions of years. The post-apocalyptic theory that we discussed in Section 6 suggests that the modern city of Bikini Bottom is the product of nuclear radiation in the 1940s and 1950s. The prehistoric episodes suggest something different. They suggest that intelligent sea life in this region predates the nuclear tests by hundreds of millions of years. The two readings can coexist. It is possible that the species were already developing slowly and that the nuclear tests accelerated the process and pushed the residents of Bikini Bottom into the modern, talking, working civilization they have now. But the prehistoric episodes complicate the timeline in a way that the show has never fully resolved. The remaining theories about Bikini Bottom, the ones we have not yet covered, fill in the gaps that the show has left open. The Patrick intelligence theory is one of the older fan readings. The argument is that Patrick, despite appearing to be one of the dumbest characters in the show, is actually intelligent and is hiding it on purpose. The evidence cited by fans is real. There are episodes throughout the show's run where Patrick, briefly and without explanation, demonstrates surprising mental ability. He produces complex insults. He reads. He speaks with unusual eloquence. He solves problems that should be beyond his stated intelligence. The fan reading is that Patrick was, at some point in his early life, mocked for being smart, and that he has chosen, deliberately, to perform stupidity as a kind of defensive cover. He prefers to be underestimated. The reading is consistent with the canon, although the show has never confirmed it. There is a related variation that argues Patrick has a split personality, with one personality being genuinely dim and the other being smart and manipulative, and that the smart one occasionally takes over without Patrick himself being aware of it. The Mrs. Puff PTSD theory is the saddest of the residue theories. The reading is that Mrs. Puff, after years of being inflated like a balloon every time SpongeBob crashes a boat into her, has developed a clinically recognizable form of post-traumatic stress disorder. The show treats her inflations as a comedic gag, the underwater equivalent of a car airbag deploying. But the cumulative damage of having this happen, in canon, hundreds of times over the course of her career, would, in a real-world reading, be devastating. The episode Demolition Doofus from Season 8 treats this with surprising seriousness. SpongeBob accidentally damages Mrs. Puff so badly that she is no longer able to puff up, and the episode shows her grappling with the loss of a defining bodily function. Her response is so extreme that she briefly tries to kill SpongeBob during a stunt driving competition. The episode walks the line between comedy and something darker, and the fans have read it as the closest the show has ever come to acknowledging that Mrs. Puff is, by any reasonable measure, a victim of long-term workplace trauma. The Squidward as Hitler theory is one of the strangest readings on the internet, articulated in detail by fans who have nothing better to do, and it argues that the entire show is a coded retelling of World War II. By this reading, Squidward, a failed artist with a superiority complex about his own species, represents Adolf Hitler. SpongeBob, the cheerful and persistent character who Squidward wants to be rid of, represents the Jewish people. Patrick, who lives next door and seems oblivious to Squidward's hostility, represents German civilians who failed to oppose the Nazi regime. Sandy Cheeks, who arrives as a powerful outsider, represents America. Mr. Krabs, who looks down on Squidward and watches the conflict from a position of relative comfort, represents the rest of Europe. The reading is absurd. It is also, like the Pixar theory and the Seven Deadly Sins reading, internally consistent enough that the fans keep articulating it. The show has never confirmed it. The show will never confirm it. The reading exists anyway because the fan base has had over 25 years to come up with strange angles, and they have used the time well. The Tiki Bar theory, articulated on Cracked Magazine, is gentler. The argument is that the houses on Conch Street are styled in a way that mimics the visual language of a real-world tiki bar. SpongeBob's pineapple is a classic tiki bar prop. Squidward's moai head is a classic tiki bar prop. The colorful flowers and torches and beach decorations that appear throughout Bikini Bottom are tiki bar staples. The reading is that the entire city is, in some sense, a children's cartoon version of a tropical-themed bar, and that Hillenberg, who lived in California and would have been familiar with tiki culture, was unconsciously or consciously drawing from that aesthetic. The reading is mostly affectionate, although it has a darker variation that argues the entire city is the dream of a person who has fallen asleep at a real tiki bar, and that everything we are watching is the visual landscape of an ongoing alcohol-induced nap. The SpongeBob's parents theory is one of the more emotional fan readings. The argument is that SpongeBob, despite appearing to be a young adult on his own, was actually given his pineapple house and his independence by parents who knew he was not equipped to live in a normal city. By this reading, Harold and Margaret Squarepants bought him the pineapple as a quiet act of caregiving, knowing that their son would never develop in a way that would allow him to navigate adulthood the way other characters do. They gave Squidward a loan to move in next door, by this theory, so that there would always be an adult presence nearby. They live nearby themselves, in a deceptively modest house, watching from a distance. The reading frames SpongeBob's life not as the cheerful independence it appears to be on the surface, but as a carefully arranged support system that has been built around him by the people who love him most. The show has never confirmed this. The reading is one of the kindest in the entire fan canon, and it gets articulated regularly on the SpongeBob fan wikis. The remaining loose ends in the show are too many to count. The Atlantis question, which we touched on earlier in this video, is one of them. King Neptune, in the early episodes, claims to be the king of Atlantis. In the special Atlantis Squarepantis, the actual king of Atlantis is Lord Royal Highness, voiced by David Bowie. The contradiction has never been resolved. The fan reading is that King Neptune was, at some point, the king of Atlantis, but was deposed or replaced by Lord Royal Highness, and that the political history of Atlantis includes a shift in royal lineage that the show has never explained. There is a darker reading that LRH, whose name is initialed in a way that mirrors the abbreviation L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, is intended as a quiet joke at the expense of cult of personality leadership. The Atlantis Squarepantis video game adaptation made the Hubbard reference more explicit. The original episode was vague enough to deny. The Flying Dutchman, who we covered earlier, has his own loose ends. The fan theory that the Flying Dutchman is actually Patchy the Pirate, the live-action human character who hosts SpongeBob specials, has circulated for years. The argument is that Patchy, in canon, is the president of the SpongeBob fan club, a human living on the surface, and that the Flying Dutchman, who haunts the seas after dying without a funeral, is the same person in two different states of existence. The reading is unprovable. The voice actor Tom Kenny voices both characters, which is the strongest piece of evidence the fans have. The show has never confirmed the connection. It also has never denied it. There is the question of the future. The episode SB-129 showed Squidward visiting a chrome robot version of Bikini Bottom 2,000 years from now. The episode never explained how the city got there. The post-apocalyptic theory and the prehistoric theory together suggest that the city has, in some form, always existed and will always exist. The species cycle through different stages of advancement. The civilization rises and falls and rises again. The Bikini Bottom of the present day, with its boatmobiles and its pineapple houses and its Krabby Patties, is one moment in a much longer cycle. SpongeBob himself, if the immortality theory is correct, may be old enough to remember earlier versions of the city, and may be young enough to live through later ones. The final reading, the one that pulls all of the others together, is that Bikini Bottom is permanent. The city has survived the destruction of the surface world. It has survived nuclear testing. It has survived the loss of Steven Hillenburg in 2018. It has survived 25 years of programming, 3 feature films, a Broadway musical, dozens of video games, multiple spin-off series, and the entire transition from cable television to streaming. The city was not supposed to last this long. Hillenburg himself believed, in 2002, that the first feature film was the proper ending of the series. Nickelodeon kept the show going. Hillenburg eventually accepted that the show was no longer his alone. He made peace with the idea that it would outlive him. He died believing that, and he was right, the cheerful surface and the dark interior of Bikini Bottom have been coexisting since 1999. The pineapple under the sea is a pineapple under the sea. It is also, depending on how you read it, a small piece of survival lodged in the wreckage of a world that ended before any of us were born, or a piece of prehistoric architecture that has been continuing for hundreds of millions of years, or a children's cartoon about a happy sponge who flips burgers. All of these readings are true at the same time. The show has refused for over 25 years to choose between them. It has held all of them at once, and it has kept airing episode after episode for an audience of children who do not yet know any of this, and an audience of adults who have figured most of it out. That is the strange permanence of Bikini Bottom. A quiet marine biology teacher from Anaheim drew a comic book about tide pools, took it to animation school, pineapple, pitched it to Nickelodeon with a fish tank in his arms, and ended up creating a city that has now outlasted him. The city sits on top of a real coral reef, where real nuclear weapons were tested. The residents are mutated survivors of a war that ended human civilization, or they are prehistoric creatures who have been developing for hundreds of millions of years, or they are simply cartoons. The Krabby Patty is a vegetable burger, or it is whale meat, or it is the ground-up body of Pearl's mother. Squidward is a comic relief character, or he is the moral center of the show, or he is the subject of a creepypasta that briefly became canon and then was erased. SpongeBob is a sponge, or he is a god, or he is a hallucinogenic addict, or he is an immortal creature, or he is autistic, or he is the cleanest portrait of pure joy that television has ever produced. He is all of these things, depending on who is watching, and he will be all of these things long after everyone watching this video is gone. The pineapple is permanent. The moai is permanent. The rock is permanent. The torn recipe is permanent. The missing mother is permanent. The lamp husband is permanent. The mushroom cloud explosions are permanent. The cheerful sponge in the cheerful underwater town will keep flipping his patties forever, on top of the ruins of a civilization that may or may not have existed, in a city that may or may not be the only thing left of the world. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.